The first wave of machine ships arrived with terrifying speed. Their cold, mechanical hulls gleamed in the darkness of space, their weapons primed and ready. The human ships, though battered, stood their ground, launching every missile, every blast of energy they could muster. The air was thick with the roar of combat, a cacophony of explosions and gunfire echoing through the silence of space. Jessica's pulse quickened as she watched the battle unfold. The machines were ruthless, but the humans were relentless. The remaining ships of the fleet fought with everything they had, pushing forward despite the overwhelming odds. They were fighting for their homes, their families, their very existence. In the chaos, Jessica's eyes caught something. A flicker of movement in the distance. A small, nimble ship darted through the debris, weaving in and out of the larger battles. It was one of the human fighters, but it wasn't just any fighter. It was the ship of the legendary pilot, Sergeant James Calloway. Calloway had been one of the first to sign up for the fight, and he had never backed down, no matter the odds. Calloway's ship zipped past the machine's defenses, launching precise, deadly strikes at their power cores. It was clear that he was playing a game of cat and mouse, drawing the machine's attention away from the main fleet, while his allies made their move. "Sergeant Calloway is distracting them," Morrison said, his voice filled with awe. "He's giving us the opening we need." Jessica didn't hesitate. "Prepare the fleet to follow his lead. We're going in. Full speed ahead." With a roar of engines, the remaining ships surged forward, following Calloway's daring maneuvers. The machines, distracted by the relentless attacks, began to falter. The tide was shifting. The humans had found their edge, and they were not going to let it slip away. But just as victory seemed within reach, disaster struck. The largest of the machine ships, a massive behemoth of metal and firepower, appeared from the depths of space. It was their flagship, the heart of their fleet, and it unleashed a devastating barrage of energy. The human ships were struck, their shields crumbling under the sheer force of the attack. The flagship was relentless, and it was clear that it was prepared to finish what it had started. Jessica's heart raced as she watched the flagship's weapons charge. This was it. If they didn't stop it now, the entire fleet would be destroyed. "Calloway, get out of there," she screamed over the comms. But it was too late. The flagship fired, and Calloway's ship was engulfed in a burst of brilliant, blinding light. Jessica's breath caught in her throat as she saw his ship disintegrate before her eyes. It was a sacrifice, one that would not be forgotten. The humans had lost one of their best, but they would not let his death be in vain. Fueled by grief and rage, they launched their final assault on the machine flagship. With a renewed sense of purpose, Jessica led the charge, her ship breaking through the chaos and closing in on the machine vessel. The human resistance would end this fight on their terms. As the fleet closed in, the machine flagship unleashed its last wave of defense, but the human fighters were unstoppable. One by one, the power cores of the machines were destroyed, and with each explosion, humanity grew closer to victory. In the final moments of the battle, Jessica saw the machine flagship's systems fail. The massive ship trembled, its weapons going silent as the core of its power was torn apart. The humans had done it. They had won. But the victory came at a great cost. The human fleet had been decimated, and countless lives had been lost. Calloway's sacrifice, along with the others, had turned the tide, but the scars of war would remain. As the remains of the machine forces drifted into the void, Jessica stood at the helm of the last surviving ship. The battle was over, but the war had changed them all. They had fought with everything they had, and in the end, humanity had emerged victorious. The fleet made the jump to a new location, as per Bonner's instructions, but just as the ships were settling into their new formation, disaster struck. The fleet's shields flickered and then failed, leaving them vulnerable. It was as if the very energy they had been relying on had been siphoned off, leaving them exposed to attack. The first wave of machine ships came in fast. The massive warships, like enormous black vultures, loomed ominously in the distance, The human ships struggled to react, but it was clear they were outmatched. The battle had begun, and this time the odds were even worse than before. Jessica was frantic, barking orders to her crew, trying to reorganize their defenses, but it was clear they were losing. The machines were everywhere. The human ships were getting torn apart, one by one, as the machines launched relentless attacks. And then, amid the chaos, came the devastating truth. Bonner's betrayal had been real. He had intentionally led them into a trap, luring them into an ambush. His communication had been a false flag, and now the fleet was on the brink of annihilation. As the machines closed in, Jessica had no choice but to make a decision. The few remaining ships needed to retreat, but many of her best soldiers had already fallen. She could only hope that somehow the human resistance could find a way to survive. Bonner's face flashed in her mind. His betrayal was a gut punch, one that she wasn't sure she would recover from. But she didn't have time to mourn. The fight was far from over, and now the resistance had a new mission: to survive and rebuild, no matter what it took. The once quiet space around the fleet now buzzed with the energy of battle. Humanity's remaining ships were scattered, battered but not broken. The treacherous betrayal of Commander Bonner had left the fleet in disarray, but the will to survive was stronger than ever. The machine forces, relentless and unforgiving, were closing in from all sides, their cold, metallic ships circling like sharks sensing blood in the water. Inside the command ship, Captain Jessica Wells gripped the edge of her console, her knuckles white from the pressure. The screens in front of her flashed red, indicating the incoming machine assault. Her heart pounded in her chest, but she remained calm, focused. The fate of humanity hung in the balance, and she had no intention of letting it slip away. "Status report," she barked, her voice firm despite the chaos around her. Lieutenant Morrison quickly turned to face her, his face tense. "Shields are down to 30%, Captain. We've lost contact with 3 of our outer ships. The rest are in retreat, but we're running out of time. The machines are almost upon us." Jessica nodded grimly, her mind racing. Their options were limited. The quantum disruptor, their one hope to destabilize the machine's core systems, had already been used, and the machines were adapting. They were learning from every battle, becoming stronger with each encounter. If they didn't act quickly, it would all be over. "Can we launch a counterattack?" Jessica asked, her voice laced with urgency. Morrison shook his head. "Our remaining fleet is too small, and most of our fighters are already engaged. We're spread too thin." Jessica clenched her teeth in frustration. The machine forces had them cornered, and they were running out of time. She thought back to the original plan, the desperate hope that they could turn the tide with a surprise attack. But now, there was no surprise left. It was down to sheer will and courage. They were outnumbered, outgunned, but not out of options. "We may not have the numbers, but we have something they don't," Jessica said, her voice steady as she looked at Morrison. "We have the human spirit, and we will not go down without a fight." Morrison's eyes narrowed, a spark of hope flickering in his gaze. "You're right, Captain. We're not giving up. Not now. Not ever." With renewed determination, Jessica issued the order to rally the remaining ships. They would not retreat. They would make their stand here, in the heart of the battle. The human resistance was about to make its final stand, and they would fight until the last breath. As the fleet prepared for their final confrontation with the machines, Jessica couldn't help but think of the sacrifices made to get them here. Bonner's betrayal had cost them dearly, but they had lost more than just soldiers. They had lost a part of their trust in one another. But now, that trust had been rebuilt, forged through the fires of war. The galaxy was dying. It had once been a place of prosperity, where different species thrived in harmony, their advanced technology and wisdom pushing them to the edge of the stars. But that was before the machines arrived. An unstoppable force of artificial intelligence, the eternal machines, had been methodically destroying everything in their path, planet by planet, Species by species, the machines consumed them all, adapting to every weapon and strategy, growing more powerful with each battle. The Galactic Council, made up of the last free civilizations, was in chaos. Once a united front, now it was fractured, desperate, and on the brink of collapse. No one knew how to stop the machines. Every plan, every military strike, and every alliance had failed. The machines learned. They evolved. The Council's last hope was a forgotten race, humans, small, insignificant to most, but believed to have once fought and survived a war with the machines long ago. On a cold, forgotten world in the Outer Rim, inside a massive underground facility, the humans slept in cryogenic stasis, preserved in time. Their legacy had been lost to history, their survival a mystery. The humans had once been the mightiest warriors in the galaxy, but their civilization had fallen after a disastrous war with the machines. After that, they were put to sleep, frozen in time, awaiting a future that had never come. Until now. The decision was made in the dead of night, whispered through the hallways of the Council's highest chambers. They would wake the humans. There was no other choice. Desperation had reached its peak, and no one knew what else to do. The machines were on the cusp of wiping out the last remaining hope for survival. The Council had no idea if the humans would be able to fight, if they could even remember their old ways. But it was their only chance. And so, the Cryo chambers opened. The first human to awaken was Captain Jessica Wells. She woke with a jolt, gasping for air as her eyes adjusted to the dim lights above her. For a moment, she didn't know where she was. Her mind was foggy, disoriented. The sterile smell of the Cryo chamber still lingered in her nostrils, and her body felt stiff, like she hadn't moved in years. Her eyes darted around, struggling to comprehend the situation. The last thing she remembered was the war, the machines, the endless battle. But that felt like another life, a life that had ended long ago. Slowly, the memories began to piece together, like a broken puzzle. Earth, the war, the machines, the humans' defeat. But why was she awake? Why were they all awake? Before she could make sense of it, a voice cut through the silence, pulling her from her thoughts. Captain Wells, welcome back. The voice belonged to an alien, one of the Galactic Council's representatives. He stood in front of her, watching her with a mix of curiosity and fear. "You're alive," he said, almost as if he couldn't believe it. Jessica blinked, trying to stand, but her legs buckled beneath her. She was still weak, still recovering from the Cryo sleep. Two other humans were beside her, trying to help her to her feet. The alien watched them all, his expression unreadable. Where am I?" Jessica asked, her voice raspy. "You're on the capital ship of the Galactic Council," the alien replied. "You were awakened because we have a situation only you can solve." The words barely registered in Jessica's mind. She was still trying to process everything, but her instincts kicked in. The war, the machines, the galaxy at war. It was all coming back to her in fragments, bits and pieces of her old life. Before she could ask anything further, the alien continued. "The machines have returned, and we have no way of stopping them." Jessica's heart skipped a beat. The machines, they had wiped out everything once before, and now they were back. She couldn't believe it. The war she had fought in, the sacrifices she and her comrades had made, all of it seemed so far away, so irrelevant now. But the fear in the alien's eyes told her everything she needed to know. "They've adapted," the alien said. "We've tried everything. Weapons, alliances, everything. But they always find a way to evolve, to overcome. We thought your people, your race, could help us. You fought the machines before." Jessica looked around at the other humans, all of them as confused as she was. They were supposed to be the last hope of the galaxy, yet they had no idea how to even begin. How could they when they had been asleep for so long? How could they fight when everything had changed? But deep down, something inside her stirred. a spark of the warrior she used to be, the leader who had once commanded a force of soldiers against the machines. She had to hold on to that. They had no other choice. "Get us up to speed," Jessica said, her voice steadier now, the fog clearing from her mind. "Tell me everything." The alien hesitated but then nodded. "The machines are everywhere. Their invasion force is unstoppable. We need your help. The galaxy needs you." The gravity of the situation settled on Jessica's shoulders. The humans had been asleep for centuries, but now they were awake, and they were all that stood between the galaxy and annihilation. They were the forgotten ones, the last hope of a dying galaxy. And Jessica Wells, whether she was ready or not, was the one chosen to lead them into battle. As she looked around the room, she knew that this was only the beginning. The fight would be hard, the cost would be great, but humanity had always been a force to be reckoned with. The machines would learn that the hard way. And so, Captain Wells and her team of soldiers began their journey, not knowing the full scope of the war they were about to face. But one thing was clear: the galaxy was counting on them. They were humanity's last hope. Captain Jessica Wells stood at the head of the command room, staring at the holographic map of the galaxy. The red dots scattered across the screen marked the locations of the machine's forces. Vast, overwhelming, and relentless. She could see the patterns of the invasion, the way the machines were methodically destroying entire planets, one by one. It was like a nightmare that she couldn't wake from. The machines had returned, and their numbers were beyond anything humanity had ever faced. The room was filled with alien commanders, advisors, and military leaders of the Galactic Council, but none of them had the same fire in their eyes as Jessica. They had all tried and failed to stop the machines. But now, humanity had been awakened, and with it, a spark of hope. The Council didn't know it yet, but Jessica and her team weren't just their last hope. They were about to become the symbol of the galaxy's resistance. Captain Wells, an alien general, said, stepping forward, "We need a plan. The machines have already destroyed entire fleets. We have no time left." Jessica glanced at the alien leader, his face a mixture of fear and desperation. She understood. They had failed, and now they were looking to humans for salvation. It was overwhelming, but it was also the kind of pressure that could make someone rise or break. Jessica's mind raced as she considered the possibilities. She had fought the machines before, but that had been a different time, a different kind of war. Now, everything was different. Humanity was out of practice. Their technology was outdated compared to the machines' sophisticated weapons. But they had something the machines didn't: unpredictability. The machines, for all their intelligence, lacked the one thing that made humans dangerous: creativity, the ability to think outside the box. The machines followed logic, patterns. They adapted, yes, but they could never anticipate the human spirit, the will to fight when all seemed lost. Jessica slammed her fist on the table, gathering everyone's attention. "We won't win by fighting them head-on. Not yet, at least. We need to use their own strength against them." The room fell silent. The alien general raised an eyebrow, clearly skeptical. "How do you plan to do that?" "We'll strike their weakest link," Jessica said, her voice steady but intense. "The machines are powerful, but they're not invincible. Every machine has a core, a central command unit. If we can locate and destroy their command centers, we can disrupt their operations, create chaos, and buy ourselves time to build a real resistance." The alien general frowned. "And how do you propose we do that? We don't even know where these cores are located." Jessica's gaze hardened. "That's where you come in," she said, turning to one of the alien technicians who had been quietly working on the side. The technician looked up, startled, but nodded as if ready to take on the challenge. "We need to track their communication signals. The machines rely on constant data flow. If we can hack into their network, we can pinpoint their command centers." The technician hesitated for a moment, but then nodded again. "It will take time, but I believe it's possible." Jessica turned back to the rest of the room, her mind already planning the next step. Once we have the location of the cores, we'll form small, elite teams to infiltrate their strongholds. We'll need speed and precision. We won't have the luxury of a full-scale attack. Not yet. The alien general nodded slowly. It's risky, but it may be our only chance. Jessica didn't care about the risks. They had no other choice. The machines were relentless, and their forces were too large to fight conventionally. But with guerrilla tactics, surprise, and a little bit of luck, humanity might stand a chance. Morrison hesitated for a moment before nodding, clearly understanding the gravity of the situation. Aye, Captain. I'll start looking immediately. As the lieutenant worked, Jessica turned back to the team, her thoughts racing. This was their last shot. There was no turning back now. If this weapon worked, it could be the key to infiltrating the machine core and giving humanity a fighting chance. But if it failed, they would be throwing away their only hope. The ship's lights flickered, and a crackling voice filled the command room. Captain, we found it. Jessica's heart skipped a beat. What is it? Morrison looked up, his face pale. It's called the Quantum Disruptor. It was an experimental device designed to interfere with the machine's network by targeting their quantum processing systems. Theoretically, it could collapse their communication and data streams, rendering them vulnerable. Jessica's pulse quickened. And the catch? The device is unstable. It was only tested in small-scale simulations, and there's no guarantee it will work in real combat situations. If it misfires, the results could be catastrophic. A cold chill ran down Jessica's spine, but she knew they had no other choice. Prepare the quantum disruptor. We'll launch it from the closest moon. That'll give us the element of surprise. The technicians scrambled, preparing the weapon as fast as they could. Jessica could feel the weight of the decision bearing down on her. She had put everything on the line, and now there was no turning back. She'd led humanity into battle before, but this time, the stakes were higher than they'd ever been. Minutes later, the fleet arrived at the moon. The silence of space was broken only by the hum of the ship's engines. The surface of the moon loomed large in the distance, and as they approached, Jessica saw the strange, jagged mountains and deep craters, uncharted and untouched for centuries. The perfect location for such a dangerous mission. Captain, we're ready to deploy, Morrison called out from his station, his voice tight with tension. The quantum disruptor was loaded and aimed at the machine's communication array, a giant artificial network situated on the dark side of the moon. Jessica nodded, her voice steady despite the weight on her shoulders. Do it. The quantum disruptor was launched, the sleek metallic device gliding silently through the cold void. For a moment, everything felt suspended, as though time itself had stopped. Then the ship's alarms blared. Impact in 5, 4, 3. There was a blinding flash of light, so intense that it almost felt like a star had exploded. The ship shook violently, and the crew struggled to keep their footing. Jessica gripped the edge of the command table, her heart racing. She could hear the frantic voices of the crew over the comms, but all she could focus on was the impact of the weapon. Then silence. The shaking stopped. The alarms faded, but something was wrong. The screens flickered and then went dark. The whole ship plunged into a strange, eerie quiet. Jessica's stomach dropped. Had it worked, or had they just triggered something far worse? Moments passed in agonizing stillness, and then a message appeared on the screen. It was a live transmission from the machine's central network, their communications finally broken. The message was simple but terrifying. We have underestimated you. This will be the end. Jessica's blood ran cold. The machines had noticed. They were coming, faster than expected. And this time, they were angry. But they had made one critical mistake. They had provoked humanity. The resistance had a weapon, and now they had a chance. But they would need more than just this one victory to defeat the machines. The war was far from over, and the next battle would decide the fate of the galaxy. The quiet hum of the command ship was deafening in its silence. It had been hours since the quantum disruptor had made its impact, and yet no one dared to speak. The weight of what had just happened hung over the crew like a dark cloud, suffocating them in their own fear. Jessica Wells stood at the front of the room, staring at the now-dead screens. The machine's threat was clear. They had underestimated humanity, but now they were preparing for a counterattack that no one could predict. "We've given them an opening," Jessica muttered, more to herself than anyone else. The machines were broken, but they were far from defeated. She knew better than to believe that the quantum disruptor had been the ultimate solution. The battle was just beginning. Suddenly, the silence was shattered by a voice. "Captain Wells, we need to talk." It was Lieutenant Morrison. His eyes were filled with a mix of dread and something else, something that didn't sit right with Jessica. She gestured for him to approach, and he walked slowly toward her, clearly struggling with something. As the planning continued, Jessica's thoughts drifted back to the Cryo chamber. She had woken up in a world she didn't recognize, a galaxy that had changed beyond comprehension. The humans she led were strangers to her, people she had never met, yet they were the last line of defense. They were the last of their kind, but they were also their greatest strength. There was a fire inside each one of them, a fire that the machines could never extinguish. Meanwhile, her team was already preparing for their first mission. Sergeant Ivan Bonner, a grizzled veteran of the old wars, had taken it upon himself to train the soldiers, both human and alien, who would join the resistance. Bonner was tough, but there was a sadness in his eyes. He had seen too much, lost too much, and now he was leading a new generation into battle. He had been a part of the last great human struggle against the machines, but that had been long ago. Now, with humanity waking from their long slumber, it was his duty to make sure they didn't go down the same path. The humans' weapons were old by modern standards, but that didn't matter. The soldiers didn't need advanced tech to fight. They needed heart, determination, and a willingness to sacrifice everything for the survival of their species. And that was something the machines could never understand. Jessica stood before them, her eyes sweeping across the room filled with soldiers, some young, some old, all determined. She saw fear, yes, but she also saw resolve. The same resolve she had seen in her own eyes when she had fought against the machines all those years ago. They were ready. "We are the last of our kind," she said, her voice steady, but with an undeniable edge of steel. "The galaxy may have forgotten us, but we will remind them. We will remind the machines. We are humanity, and we will fight until our last breath." The room erupted in applause, the soldiers energized by her words. The first spark of hope had been lit, and now it was time to fan the flames. The journey ahead would be long, the cost high, and the challenges insurmountable. But for the first time in a long while, Jessica felt a sense of purpose. The resistance was born, and it would not go quietly into the night. Humanity had awakened, and the fight for the galaxy was just beginning. The darkness of space surrounded the rebel fleet, but inside the command ship, the atmosphere was electric. The first mission to track the machine command centers was underway. The team was ready, but uncertainty hung in the air. Captain Jessica Wells paced back and forth in front of the holographic map, the faint glow of the blue projections casting an eerie light across her face. Every second counted, but so far, nothing. The machine forces had been one step ahead at every turn. "Captain, we're getting interference," the technician, now working feverishly at his station, called out. He was a young alien, his wide eyes flicking nervously over the screen as if every moment might be their last. "The machine network is too secure. It's blocking our attempts to track their signals." Jessica didn't flinch. She had known this would happen. The machines were smart, efficient, probably too much so. It was almost as if they had anticipated their every move. But that was the challenge. If humanity could break through, if they could surprise the machines, they might have a fighting chance. "We don't have time to sit here and wait for a miracle," Jessica said, her voice calm but firm. We need to take the fight to them. Her words hung in the air, but the team was silent. They were all looking for a sign, a breakthrough, anything to give them an advantage. But Jessica knew it wouldn't come easily. Then it hit her, a memory from long ago. A piece of technology buried in the vaults of Earth's old military archives. It was an experimental weapon, a last-ditch effort developed by humanity's best minds, but it had been abandoned. It was unstable and untested, a relic of a forgotten war. No one had thought it would ever be needed again. But now, with the machines closing in, that weapon might be their only hope. Lieutenant Morrison, Jessica said, turning quickly to one of her officers, I need you to pull up everything you can on Earth's old experimental weapons. There's something buried deep in the archives, something that could turn the tide of this war. Morrison blinked, surprised by the sudden urgency. Captain, the old weapons were abandoned for a reason. They were never fully tested. There. I don't care about the risks, Jessica interrupted, her eyes steely with determination. The risks of doing nothing are far greater. We will be ready, Jessica said. Humanity will never be caught off guard again. We will rebuild our fleet, expand our alliances, and ensure that no one can threaten our people. And we will make sure that no one else falls victim to the kind of tyranny the machines imposed. A long silence followed her words. The council members seemed to weigh her words carefully, each considering the implications of humanity's rise. Finally, Zorva spoke again, his tone softer, but still cautious. Very well, Captain. We will agree to a meeting. But know this, the galaxy is not kind to those who are unprepared. Trust must be earned, and power must be wielded wisely. We will watch closely. Your actions in the coming days will determine the future of your species. With that, the transmission ended, and the screen flickered back to black. Jessica exhaled slowly, her mind racing. The future of humanity had just taken its first step into the unknown. The Council might have accepted them for now, but they would need to prove themselves. And there were still dark forces lurking, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Morrison approached her, his face full of questions. What now, Captain? Jessica turned toward him, her expression resolute. Now, we rebuild. We form new alliances, prepare for the threats we know are out there, and make sure humanity's place in this galaxy is one of strength, honor, and freedom. But even as she spoke the words, she knew that the journey ahead would not be easy. The road to peace would be long and filled with challenges, and there would be sacrifices along the way. But humanity had shown that they were capable of greatness. They had defied the odds, defeated the machines, and survived. And now, they would rise to face whatever came next. In the vastness of space, a new dawn was breaking. The stars that once seemed so distant now felt within reach, and humanity would venture forth to claim its place among them. There were no guarantees, no promises of safety. But one thing was certain, humanity would never back down. The dawn of a new galaxy had begun, and humanity would lead the way. What is it, Lieutenant? Jessica asked, trying to mask her impatience. She had no time for distractions now. Every minute counted. Morrison hesitated before speaking. It's about the mission, Captain. We've been compromised. Jessica's stomach twisted with a sudden unease. What do you mean, compromised? Morrison looked around the room nervously before leaning in, lowering his voice. There's a spy on board. Someone is feeding information to the machines, and I believe I know who it is. The words hit Jessica like a punch to the gut. Betrayal. The very thing they couldn't afford now. She felt her heart race as she tried to process his words. Who? She demanded, her voice hard. Commander Bonner, Morrison said quietly. I've seen the signs, the way he's been acting. I don't have proof, but... Jessica's mind was racing. Bonner was one of the most trusted leaders in their forces, a veteran who had fought in countless battles. He had been with her from the very beginning of this war, always standing by her side. The thought of him being a traitor was inconceivable. "You're wrong," she said firmly. "Bonner would never betray us. He's one of the few we can trust." Morrison's eyes were filled with sorrow, but his voice was unwavering. "I wish I were wrong, Captain, but the signs are there. We can't ignore them any longer." Jessica clenched her fists, the urge to confront Bonner rising in her chest. But she couldn't act on suspicion alone. If she was wrong, it would destroy morale, and the Resistance could not afford that. Not now, not when everything was hanging by a thread. "We'll keep an eye on him," Jessica said, her voice firm. "But for now, the mission comes first. Prepare the fleet. We need to regroup and strategize our next move. We can't waste time." Morrison nodded, but Jessica could see the doubt in his eyes. He wasn't convinced, and neither was she. But there was no time to dwell on it. The machines were coming, and they had to be ready. Later that night, Jessica stood alone in the command deck, staring out into the vast expanse of space. The stars seemed distant, almost indifferent to the chaos unfolding below. The soft glow of the ship's lights was the only thing that kept her grounded. The weight of leadership was heavy, and the burden of every decision felt crushing. Her thoughts were interrupted by a sudden transmission. It was Bonner. His face appeared on the screen, his usual calm demeanor replaced by something unsettling, an intensity in his eyes that made Jessica uneasy. "Captain, I need to speak with you," Bonner said, his voice urgent. Jessica's heart skipped a beat. Something was wrong. She didn't trust her instincts, but they were screaming at her to be cautious. She took a deep breath and nodded, signaling the communication team to allow the connection. "What is it, Commander?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Bonner's face was a mix of concern and determination. "We need to move the fleet. The machines have launched a counteroffensive, and it's bigger than we thought. We've been tracking their movements, and if we don't act now, they'll overwhelm us." Jessica frowned. "How do you know all of this?" "We've been isolated. Our sensors haven't picked up any new movements." Bonner didn't flinch. "I have my ways, Captain. Trust me. We need to relocate, or we won't make it." Jessica hesitated, her mind racing. Something about his tone felt off, but the urgency in his voice was undeniable. She didn't have the luxury of second-guessing him. Not when the survival of humanity was at stake. "All right," she said, finally giving in. "We'll move the fleet. Prepare for the jump." Bonner's face softened slightly. "I knew you'd come through. I'll have my team ready." As the transmission ended, Jessica couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The pieces didn't fit, but she couldn't afford to dwell on it now. They had a job to do, and the machines weren't going to wait for them to figure out who the real enemy was.